remember another story told to me by Mr. Weiland, who was a good friend of my grandfather. He said Henry told him this story, that on Andrew Montgomery's home, there was a granary. And I have saw this particular granary when we were there in 1928. This granary was built in such a way that it had a secret room that could not be detected from the outside. Just how they got into it, I never learned, and Mr. Weiland didn't know. Evidently, there was an underground entrance into this particular room. And all the other grain bins was around it. Well, they were tipped off, he was, that they were very close. And he got into this particular room in the granary, and he could hear them talking to Andrew Montgomery. Now, at this time, he was a single man and was not married to grandmother. And he heard the cavalry officer say to his men, he says, "Well, boys," he says, "we have looked everywhere. And he cannot possibly be hiding anywhere that we have looked. There is only one building that we have not saw inside of, and that is this granary." They were standing right beside the granary. And he told Mr. Weiland, he says, "I heard Montgomery say, 'Well, officer, if you think he's in there, I'll get the axe, and you work on this to your satisfaction.'" Henry told Mr. Weiland, he says, at that moment, he says, "I was a dead man. I was a deserter. And the only thing that would have happened to me would have been death." He says what seemed like an eternity, Andrew Montgomery heard him return and say to the officer, "Well, here's the axe," and he said, "I heard it hit the ground." And for what seemed like another eternity, finally the officer said, "Mount up, boys, he isn't here." Of course, that's just one of the stories. My mother told me how when they were hiding out, they were in a cave or some sort of a depression where they could get down into and not be detected. And there was only a couple of fellows that knew where that was. I don't recall anymore who it was, but I know there was some Abshires, Montgomerys and Peterses and others that were with this group that were very secretive in their hiding out places. And one time grandfather came back down to their hideout, and there was a pipe laid there. And it did not belong to any of his acquaintances. And Mother never did find out, or did know whose pipe it ever was, or whether they ever find out whose it was. But that particular hiding place was never again even gone close to. I talked one time to Molly Montgomery Boone. She was a cousin to grandmother's. Their fathers were half-brothers. And when the scouts came along there, she was only 3 years old. And they came along and they was looking for Henry Peters. And of course I think that some of her brothers were in the group that the scouts were looking for. But anyway, they says to her, "Young lady, we're looking for Henry Peters. And can you tell us where we can find him?" And she says, "Yes, he's out in the barn with my brothers." But it so happened that Henry Peters and the Montgomery boys were not in the barn when the scouts got out there, because they had saw them coming and they had taken off. Now that was an experience that she told me. However, she knew nothing about my grandfather's family. She knew of him only through her family kidding her and all along through the years about turning in her brothers and Henry Peters. which of course she didn't remember anything about. The time I talked to her, she was in her 90s. I don't know, it was way back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, around there someplace when I talked to her. Get it, that I turned my brothers and Henry Peters into the Confederates. Well, after a couple of these incidents, the boys decided it was entirely too hot around there. They decided they would go to Elkhart County, Indiana. Now, I might make a little statement here as to why they chose Elkhart County. Elder Henry Neff was married to Anna France, and Samuel Whitehead was married to Sarah France. They were sisters. The Frances had come first from Pennsylvania to Virginia, and then Samuel Whitehead's wife, Sarah, and some of her family got down into Ohio. They got down into Ohio rather than Virginia. Of course, the France girls were acquainted with the Neffs, who was married into the Peters and the Bowmans and the Montgomerys and the Neff families, and everybody in that particular area that was in the old Dunkard church. So they decided to go to Elkhart County. There was Michael Montgomery, Henry Montgomery, John. Now they were brothers of my grandmother's, and John and James Peters, half-brothers of Grandpa, Amos Peters, a cousin of grandfather's, and also related to the Montgomery boys, and a William Bowman, and an Abshire, and some others. I think there was 8 of them left Virginia, Franklin County, together. They traveled at night and slept and hid out during the day. When they got over into what they thought was Union territory, which it was in Virginia, West Virginia. West Virginia had ceded from the state of Virginia just about the time of the outbreak. They wanted no part with slavery and the rebellion. But so they were running out of supplies and decided they would go through a small town. Well, they were in Union territory, in a Union state. But naturally, there was many thousands of Southern sympathizers in this particular village where they stopped. Result was they were recognized as Virginians and were escaping from the South, and they were deserters and everything else that was wrong so far as during wartime. And they attacked the boys. And Grandfather was the oldest of the group. And so he kind of took the lead in the protection and the defense. And if it had not been, so he stated, for the intercession of some old men there, the boys, the Southern sympathizers, would have killed him. Well, the other boys took off, went down the road on the run, and when Henry started out, he made the remark, he told, I think it's Mr. Weiland or my mother, I'm not just sure which, that when he run his hand through his hair came out in patches. He had been so badly beaten. He got down the road a ways, and there was a fork. Well, now, which way did the boys go? He waited there a while, and there was a man came along with a mule and a cart, and he says, Henry said to him, did you see meet any boys down the road? He says, yes, there's a number of them sitting on the fence down there. They don't know which way to go. Well, they finally got into Elkhart County, and there they joined up with the Neffs and the Whitehead.